Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with jazz guitarist, educator, and music industry consultant Cameron Mizell. This very busy cat started his life off in St. Louis, Missouri, and these days he's a mainstay in New York City. His latest album is 2016's Negative Spaces, and he's logged a lot of time on albums, at venues, as a teacher, and all over the world doing his guitar magic. So get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Cameron, thank you for taking some time to talk with me about your life in music, Negative Spaces, and some surprises in between. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. No, I appreciate you wanting to have the conversation.
Right on, man. So let's go ahead and start off here. I know that you're pretty clear about your schedule and what's going on with your life, but in your own words, tell me what's going on with you with your music life these days.
You know, I do this full time, and part of being a full-time guitarist is playing all kinds of music, at least for me. And so I'm constantly learning songs by all different artists, and at the same time writing new music. I try to sit down and write something, at least finish a song every week. I've just lately, I've been not trying to, say, okay, this song needs to sound like something I would play with my trio or sound like something I would play on solo guitar. It's just a melody and some chord changes, and who knows what it's going to be like. And I'm realizing all the different music that I've been playing and learning for other artists, the influence it has on how I write and, what's happening with, my new music. It's just, it becomes more and more diverse. And I don't know, it's interesting when you kind of let yourself be a little bit free of any preconceived notion of what the music is supposed to sound like, And I think that there's some of that comes across on Negative Spaces, which was recorded. I mean, it was recorded a while ago, but it was kind of this, the start of this mindset of, musically just being open to all the different kinds of stuff I like to play.
You obviously feel good about the album. Take me into the studio. How did this project come about, and how did it all happen?
Well, I'd released an album with the trio, with Brad and Kenneth, in 2010. And we worked on that, we played out that music for a little bit over a year. But that album, we had been playing the music a lot before we recorded. So once I kind of just felt done with it. And I spent several years writing music. I don't know, I had a ton of material to choose from for Negative Spaces. And some of it I ended up using some stuff that was kind of written for different projects, but, I just felt like, you know what, man, this is my music. This is the song I like. I just want to do it. So I got together with the guys a little bit before the recording session to rehearse, but we had not played the music as a group, prior to that, which was a very different approach from what we had done in the past. I wanted it to be very fresh. I wanted, them to have their own ideas kind of evolving so that, it wasn't going to sound like some super polished thing when we went in. I wanted to have, some raw energy. And, that's what we did. We had a couple rehearsals and recorded the music, and we just tried to keep everything nice and pretty simple in terms of our improvisations where we focused on being melodic and everything serving the song and the composition, and the vibe of each piece is a little bit different. And I had an idea of how it was all going to fit together. I don't know if everybody saw what that was going in, but I feel like we definitely were able to accomplish it by the end.
So let me ask you this. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in St. Louis, and I spent, raised there, spent the first 18 years of my life in St. Louis.
What was it about, it's a blues town.
Yeah.
I was there a year ago to try to find some jazz, and I just could not find anything going on other than blues. So that's the funny thing about the Kansas City St. Louis split. There tends to be blues and jazz here, but it seems like the hockey team's named well. I can tell you that because it's a blues town. So let me ask you this. What was it about your growing up years that lent you to get into music and more specifically into jazz?
My mom was a dance teacher, and when I was 3 years old, she put all of I've got an older sister and a younger brother. We all were in dance classes from the beginning. So at 3 years old, I'm learning my left foot from my right foot to, some record that was, big band music or essentially, jazz music. So and I did a lot of tap dancing. I actually tap danced until I was like 16. And a lot of the music used with tap dance kind of comes from the same place as jazz and the rhythms. I had a jazz teacher one time say, Charlie Parker rhythms just sound like tap dancing, and it was like, yeah, it totally does. The bebop rhythms are exactly what Gregory Hines or somebody might sound like. So that kind of rhythmic feel and exposure to the music, I think, kind of set up the foundation for what I love about music like this. But it wasn't, I started playing guitar later, and I really didn't get into playing jazz on guitar until high school. After, of course, I started playing guitar, and I was like playing rock music and Metallica, when I was 13 years old. And then there's this article by the guitarist in Metallica in some guitar magazine talking about how he had been listening to John Coltrane and Miles Davis and how it changed the way he was trying to solo. And I was like, I should check that out. And so I went and bought, it was just like it was called Miles and Coltrane. It was sort of like a compilation CD with a lot of that late 50s Miles stuff. And I was like, oh, I see. And so I over the next couple of years ended up trading in all of my 90s rock CDs and Metallica CDs and just started building my jazz CD collection. Eventually got kind of blue, and then from there it's like you say, I got to check out more Cannonball Adderley, and I got to check out more Wynton Kelly, and you go check out a Wynton Kelly or an album that Wynton Kelly's on, and there's Wes Montgomery, and so you start. I started getting exposed to stuff that way, just by kind of following the discographies of the guys on Kind of Blue, and then I was kind of stuck in the jazz world. Now, the thing you're mentioning about St. Louis not having much of a jazz scene, what's funny is I've noticed that when I've gone back to visit, there is some jazz there. I've still got friends in St. Louis that play, but in the 90s, there was sort of this swing revival. I don't know if you remember, people were go swing dancing and that was getting big. And I used to go swing dancing with my wife, who was a dancer, and so we had a great time. But I actually played in a couple swing bands with some guys that were older than me, who were jazz musicians, and of course, having a swing band, you got to have a horn section, and so I had these guys that were sort of, I don't know, I was the kid in the band, and they're kind of giving me advice along the way. They played in a big band at BB's Jazz, Blues, and Soup. I don't know, did you ever know Keith Ellis?
Yes.
Trombone player. Yeah, he played in that band, and, really a great guy for the jazz scene in St. Louis. It was really a tragedy when he passed away. I think he was in his 40s when he passed away. But, those guys kind of helped me understand what happens as a jazz musician, trying to make a living as a jazz musician. And I don't know, I was very lucky to work with people like that when I was a kid.
That kind of leads into my next question, which, the real world experience is invaluable, but from a formal educational standpoint, what kind of formal education did you have, and what did you learn about the music industry?
I went to school at the University of North Texas and studied jazz guitar there. And then about halfway through, I transferred, like in my junior year, I transferred to Indiana University. And at Indiana, actually, when I got there, they'd just gotten rid of the undergrad jazz guitar program. I mean, I learned a ton of great stuff at North Texas that I'm probably still unpacking to this day in my brain. And I learned a ton of great stuff at Indiana. I mean, David Baker is just a phenomenal educator, and or was, another very sad loss to, the jazz industry when David Baker passed away earlier this year. Because kids ask me all the time, should I go to school to study jazz? And I think that it's important to do that because you spend so much time practicing. It's the only time in your life where like 8 hours of practice a day is possible, and it's pretty necessary. So that was really important. And then the other thing was just playing with so many different types of musicians, many of whom are still very good friends of mine today. In fact, Brad Whiteley, who's on Negative Space, is the keyboard player. Him and I met at Indiana, and he's one of my best friends. The formal education is totally important to, get the music stuff together, build a strong foundation, but also just with meeting people and building your network.
Speaking of networks, you've moved on to New York City. What has it been like to go to such the jazz mecca on the planet and to get immersed in that environment? What has that been like for you?
Well, it's kind of scary. I think everybody will tell you that. I came here with no job. No, my wife and I moved here. We had nothing lined up. We just knew we wanted to be here. Just paying rent for the first year was difficult. And, I had a job selling sofa beds. I had a job selling office supplies. Had all these odd jobs. And I ended up landing in a temp job in the music industry at Verve Records. And that led to a full-time job. But the path that I took was essentially I need to just get a day job to pay my bills. It left me with less time to go out and pursue music as much as I would have liked. So the time I was focusing on music, I was, working on my stuff a lot. I'd been playing in, before I moved to New York, my band was like an 8-piece ensemble, and there's just no way I was going to be able to organize something like that in New York. So I was kind of reworking my tunes and writing new stuff for a trio setting, which just is a lot more feasible in the city. But, I did some jam sessions. That whole scene is kind of its own world where you can go out and meet different players and, kind of get schooled on the bandstand a little bit. I didn't do as much of that as I think some people do, but I was playing with my network of friends from college a lot, and everything I had been through in college, trying to book gigs and trying to meet people, from transferring from one school to the next. I just did the exact same thing when I got to New York. Worked with the people I knew, hustled for my own gigs, just worked my way into the scene that way, as opposed to doing all the jam sessions.
And everything's worked out pretty well. You've had 5 albums as a leader. You're a freelance guitarist. You're an educator, music industry consultant, run a record label. How have all of these come together for you to make you a whole music organism? That's A. And B, how have you grown over the years?
So the way it all came together is almost by accident. This, like I said, I got this temp job at the record label, and it turned out that I was pretty good at what they needed me to do, which was I was doing production, which is kind of like a taskmaster / organizer / attention to detail sort of guy. And so the fact that I loved jazz and, loved paying attention to who was on what record and who wrote what tune, and, I just totally absorbed all this information. We were digitizing music so that, some Johnny Hodges album that was out of print because you just don't sell that many Johnny Hodges CDs.
Yeah.
But, you know, it was at the time where you wanted to get stuff on iTunes, which was a new store. So, you know, for me to be able to dig through all these old, you know, Johnny Hodges or like deep Oscar Peterson catalog or whatever, and, you know, make sure that we had all the information about the album correct, you know, who played on it, what the tunes were, who wrote those tunes, and then you have to enter that information into this system that can, you know, it digitizes the music and associates the metadata, you know, all that information with those digital files, and then it's distributed out to everybody. But, you know, back in the day when you just make a record, it's just you put it on the artwork. It's not going into any kind of system, you know what I mean? So all this stuff had to be digitized, and I was good at that, and I was good at proofreading artwork. And, you know, one of the things I still do today is just listen to masters before of albums for different record labels before they go to press, just because I, you know, have listened to so many of these things that I can be like, oh, I can recognize when there's a, you know, any kind of little distortion or if something is unbalanced or whatever, when people just need an extra set of ears to listen to a master before they go to print. All those things just happened because it turned out I was kind of good at that.
Yeah.
You know, you can't go to school for that kind of job.
No.
And it didn't even exist when I was in school. You know what I mean? A lot of this stuff didn't exist when I was in school, and actually some of it probably doesn't even exist now, you know, 10 years later. So all of this stuff, you know, and the whole time when I'm at the record label, I'm thinking about what are some ways that I can apply this to my career as a musician, which, you know, you've got to do because you're always grappling with the idea that, you know, I wanted to be a musician full time, but I also at the time needed the job to make ends meet. So trying to make it all make sense, you know, I just talked to everybody that would take some time to tell me about what they did, you know, the lawyer for the label or the art director or a designer, you know, or the press assistant, you know, whatever. Everybody had information that they could help me to understand. And not that they were doing anything for me other than just teaching me about what they did. So that led to, I left Verve to pursue music full time, but even after I left Verve, the music industry has been shrinking, and a lot of people have lost their jobs, unfortunately. But every now and then projects come up where they just need somebody to help, you know, with that end, you know, that sort of scheduling aspect of the project, and, you know, who's available that has experience doing all this stuff. Well, it's usually me because I otherwise don't have a day job. That's kind of continued for me just because I happen to be available and I'm good at it, and I've worked with a lot of people who know they can rely on me. I mean, I think that musically, there's sort of this change that maybe took place around the time I was about 30, and like I kind of stopped caring what people thought about my music or me in general. And you know, ever since college, you get to college and everybody kind of labels everybody else. Okay, this guy plays like that, this guy plays like that. And you change so much, you know what I mean? You're going to grow as a musician and a player throughout your life, but especially in your 20s. And you just, I don't know, it's easy to get caught up on what people think of you, you know, or how they assign some sort of characteristic to your playing. So there was a time where I was trying really hard to be a bebop guitar player. And I think at some point I just realized, you know what? That's just not what my strength is. I love the music, but there are so many guys that are so much better at that, you know, at playing bebop guitar, that it doesn't matter. It's okay if I don't do it. It's okay if my music doesn't, incorporate certain elements of traditional jazz vocabulary, because jazz really is a process. You know what I mean? If you think about how you play music, where the creative process starts, I think for jazz musicians, it's learning every aspect of the tune. It's learning, the melody, even if you're just playing. I mean, if I'm playing a rock song, with some band and I'm just playing a guitar part, I still am learning the bass line and the melody and trying to incorporate how everything works in the song, even if I never really play it that way. It's just ingrained in me to learn songs that way. And that comes from years of playing jazz. You play standards and you want to learn every aspect of the song. So I just allowed that process to take over for every type of music that I play, and I allowed my music to take its own shape. I think that my influences might be obvious when you hear my certain songs, like, oh yeah, he's doing sort of a John Scofield sort of thing or whatever. And you can't hide those influences too much, I don't think. But I just stopped worrying if somebody was going to think that I was, authentically playing jazz or authentically playing a specific style, and just let it be. And then I think the music becomes more authentic when you do it that way.
Why do you love jazz?
Jazz, to me, is a deeper understanding of music. I recently heard Herbie Hancock, and he played songs that he's probably been playing for, 50, 60 years, and he still makes it sound so fresh. And, it sounded like the most modern jazz you could imagine, but it also had at its heart, the core of the tradition from which it was born back in the early 60s. And to me, that to be able to do that with music, it's kind of addicting, to keep going back to songs and to hear somebody like Herbie Hancock, who's an absolute master, and, aspire to someday be able to have music be such an internal language for yourself and reimagine my own music or other people's music, 20 years from now, and make it sound as fresh as I try to make it sound now.
So let me ask you this. Of all the years that you've performed music and been around, what's one of the nicest things a fan has ever said to you?
That's a good question. I've had some really, people are very kind a lot of times at shows. And I think one time there was a kid at a show who, I don't know how old he was. He was maybe 18 or 19, and he'd recently lost his father. And we played, I can't remember what tune it was, but we played a tune by the Meters. I don't know, his dad loved the Meters, and he just came up, he was like, man, when you played that song, it made the rest of your music make so much more sense to me, and it reminded me of my father, who I just lost, and it was a really special moment for him. And for me and the other guys in the band, it just felt like we had made somebody's day better, or maybe we just touched somebody through just playing music in the deepest way that you could want to do it. Want to have an effect on somebody's life and make them feel better in that moment. The fact he opened up to us and shared that was pretty special to me. I've had a number of times where when I'm playing with another artist or whatever, where people are just very complimentary about how the music blends together and, my guitar sound or whatever. But, I remember that young man because he just was very vulnerable in the moment. And I don't think you don't go up and play like the meters and kind of funky jazz music expecting somebody to give you that reaction. So it was very special.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this. This is my final question. Everybody has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, the fans that you play for. But who do you think you are? When you wake up and face the world, who are you?
I try to be pretty transparent. So, every day I get up and I kind of have a plan in my head about how much practicing I'm going to try to get done and, what else I'm going to try to accomplish that day. And, I just try to focus on doing the tasks that I feel like need to get done at the time. And try to be productive and try to be honest with people about, like, somebody reached out to me and wanted my opinion about their music, and just try to engage with them in the most honest and productive way possible. I don't know. I guess I don't try to focus too much about who I am. I just try to focus on what I can do each day. Every day is a chance to kind of get a little bit better at guitar. It's also a chance to help somebody out with their music, or, with the record label, there's always opportunities to do something for one of our artists.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That sums it up, man. That's a good answer. It's a good way to wrap everything up. Cameron, thank you for taking some time out today. Thanks for the music, and thanks for opening up with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Cameron for all of his stories, his honesty, and the music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit the Neon Jazz YouTube channel, and you can always get everything Neon Jazz at theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.